Hello, so today we are going to be working with paragraph formatting, which is really going to be looking at the overall flow of the body of text. So not in as much individual characters, but more the entire appearance of the entire paragraph. So right now what I'm going to do, I've got just a blank Word document open, and I'm going to use our shortcut to add some sample text equals LOREM, open parentheses, close parentheses, press enter, and that gives us just our sample text that's going to be up there. So now that we have a few paragraphs up, we're going to work through a few options that are in our paragraph tab. So if you are new to Microsoft Word or need a refresher, just remember we are under the Home tab, the Home ribbon, and so we're going to be looking through the paragraph options. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the alignment options. So with the alignment options, if we select our text that we want it to apply to, we can see that it's left aligned currently as the default, meaning that it's down the left hand side. If we click to right align, it lines everything up. The order of our words stays the same, but everything lines up down this right hand side as opposed to lining up on the left hand side as we're accustomed to. If we select center, it lines each line up. Again, the words are in the same order, but it lines them up centered to where the center character is in the middle of each page. If we use the justified option, that lines it up on both the left-hand side and the right-hand side. It does add some spaces, some extra spaces in each one. So you can see there are some differences where it's a little bit different spacing in order to get that perfect lineup on the left and on the right hand side. So those are the alignment options, but today what we're going to be looking at primarily is looking at how can we see the indents, and then we're also going to work with tab stops, and we'll talk about what that means. So the first thing that we want to see is where our indents are. One thing that I've done already that I have up, you can see the ruler that's going across the top. If you click on the View tab, if your ruler is not currently showing, in the Show group, there are some options. We're not going to use the other two right now, but we are going to turn on the ruler. It's very important when you are working with your indents to have your ruler up, because that's where a lot of the changes actually get made, especially with tab stops are along this ruler. So it's more than just to look at to see how much space it's taking up. It actually becomes a tool where we begin to place our tab stops and use that as a tool. So first we need to talk about what is an indent. And so an indent is the blank space that gets left before or after. If I press tab on my keyboard, so I'm pressing right here, that gives us just a manual indent. I indented it right there. There's no extra formatting or things that are going to continue to happen. I've just manually tabbed over one spot. You can see that this top arrow moved to the ½ inch mark. This would be the inch mark. So this bigger tick mark there showing that it is the ½ inch mark. I'm just going to press backspace to get rid of that tab. And I'm going to go back to our home option. So there are a few different ways that we can change an indent, and there are a few special types of indents that we're going to look at. I'm going to use my dialog box launcher in the paragraph group. That's a square with the arrow pointing down. When we click on that, it's going to give us more options for our paragraph look altogether. We're going to be working this section today with the indents. I do need to actually close out of here. I need to select. We could just click and drag across. Just another shortcut. Control and A will select the entire document, but however you want to select it, go ahead and select your entire amount of text, and then we'll click that dialog box launcher. So under the indentation tab, I want to show you a few special ways that we can indent. First, that if I click this drop down, the two special options are a first line indent and a hanging indent. The first line indent, it gives you a preview down at the bottom here. It's just where only the first line of a paragraph. This is typically what you're going to use when you are typing a paragraph that you want to have indents. That when you use the first line, it automatically indents the first line of the paragraph. Every other line starts at your normal spot over to the left-hand alignment, assuming that's how you have it set up. We can change the amount that we want the indent to do. So we're going to change it to 1 inch. Typical is a ½ inch, so if you want your paper to kind of look in a standard formatting, a ½ inch is what you're going to use, but we're going to change it to a full inch just so we can see that change, and we will change it back to a ½ inch later. So let's go ahead and click OK, and now you can see that our indent moved all the way over to the 1 inch mark. Also just notice that these arrows at the top, these two triangle shapes are giving us some points here. The one that looks like it's pointing down, if we think about the point pointing down. This is what's going to be our first line indent mark. If you'll notice that when we had it at 1/2 inch, it was over here. When we moved it to the full inch, it jumped over to here. This shows us where your first line indent is going to come to. So if you have it set up to a first line indent, it's going to line up here. We can move that. This is another way to adjust it by just dragging this arrow here. You do have to be very careful when you are moving this indent by the triangles, because your typical default is going to be with everything lining up on the left hand side, and if you accidentally grab like the square that's at the bottom, that moves the entire alignment to where your entire block of text is going to be indented over. But if we select just the top, it does our first line indent, and if we do just the bottom, it does what's called a hanging indent. And you see I've actually grabbed there the square at the bottom, which is what I was cautioning you about doing, that we don't want to move the entire text. So I'm going to go ahead and select my text again, go to the dialog box launcher, and then now I'm going to try it with a hanging indent of a 1/2 inch. Press OK. And now you can see that instead of having the first line indented over, it's actually indented every line other than the first line. So this actually is a short line of text here. Because there were not 2 lines to it, it was only 1 line, there was actually no indent for this paragraph. However, in the larger paragraphs, it gave us this indent for every other line other than the first. This is going to be primarily used if you are writing like a research paper and you are citing your sources. A lot of the official ways of citing documents are done with a hanging indent in the references page. So that's one area that you might see that. I'm going to go ahead and select my text again, go back to my dialog box launcher, and see that we can see it gives us the sample at the bottom. We can change the amount of that hanging indent the same way as we can change it with the hanging indent. But for now, we're actually going to switch back and click on None. And when I click OK, that's going to take everything back to this line. And actually, where I moved it earlier, it's still actually off just a hair. There we go. Now it's back to that starting line that's right here. So you can also see that we have the option to move the indents through these tools here, that we can move the first line indent and the hanging indent. This one is also going to show us the right indent, and so what the right indent is going to do, that's just showing us where it's going to end. So if you actually wanted to, like if you had like a poem in a paper that you wanted to be offset, or if you had a larger block of quote in some styles, you may have an entire paragraph offset to where it actually sets up in the middle as opposed to on both edges. So that's with our right indent, and then using our left indent as well, which is what happens when we grab the square at the bottom that moves both. So the next thing that we're going to look at is changing the right and left indent as a whole. I'm going to press Control A as my shortcut again to select all of the text. And again, I'm going to click the dialog box launcher. Or actually another way to launch this, I'll go ahead and show you that instead of clicking the dialog box launcher, if you right click, it gives you this shortcut options, and the paragraph group is actually underneath there too. It's the exact same thing, just a different way to get to it, that you can just right click on some highlighted text and it opens that up. We can then add a left indent, which you can see in the preview down here. It moves the entire block of text. Let's move it just up to 1 inch. It's actually the exact same thing that I did by dragging the arrow on the right hand side and using the square at the bottom to move the entire box. And then I can change the right indent up to 1 inch as well. You can see that that's showing us that it's going to increase the margins for the entire left side and the entire right side. Click OK. Then I can actually still apply my alignments. So like if I wanted it to be justified, or centered, left aligned, right aligned, it still does that, but they only go out, instead of going all the way out to the edges, they go to wherever those indents happen to be set. So just to get us back to sort of our normal or default look, I'm going to one more time select all of the text, and I'm going to drag our left alignment all the way to the left, drag our right alignment all the way to that 6.5 inch mark. I'm going to left align it so that we pretty much look kind of like our normal look, like we're used to seeing on the page, actually without any indent at all. So the next thing that we're going to do is look at how we could add a little bit of style or highlighting to text. So you may have seen that we can highlight a individual section of a word. We can change the color of the font, but in this section what we're going to look at is how can we change that for an entire paragraph as a whole, because now we're not looking at just the individual characters, but we're actually looking at the formatting of the entire page and the flow of the text. So let's say that we wanted to highlight our, or really shade is probably the technical definition, but if we wanted to shade our first paragraph. So we see that we've got an option here called shading. What that is going to do, it's going to put a block of color kind of behind that entire paragraph. So it's not going to be just where the words are, it's going to go for that entire paragraph. So we're going to look at that first, and when we click this drop down, first I had to select the amount of text that we wanted to cover here. And I'm going to click my drop down arrow, and we're going to look at the colors. And there's a few things that I want us to look at when it comes to the color. And so when I hover over each individual color, you'll see a couple things that are happening. It gives us a preview of what that color is going to look like. It also, in the screen tip, which is that little drop down box that comes down below the mouse pointer, and so like this one example says blue accent 1 lighter 60%. This gives us actually an exact color that we can find. And if we look, there are two headings. We've got a theme colors, we have a standard color. If you just go to the standard colors, that gives you the colors that pretty much you're used to just hearing without all the technical sides to it, that we have red, orange, yellow. It differentiates with green to being light green and green, blue, light blue, and blue. It's also going to give us a dark blue and a purple. If we go up to the theme colors, it gives us, you can see that kind of gives us the theme color of like a white, black, gray, some different blue options. And then it gives you the variations of how dark or how light do you want it. With each of these, so like with the blue, it gives us a lighter 60%. As we go down, lighter 40%. Darker 25%, and then finally darker 50%. This would allow you that if you were trying to look at instructions for how to pick a specific color, you could really identify an exact color. We could actually, if we click to more colors, look at the entire or a broader spectrum of colors, or if we go to custom, we could even use the exact RGB colors, or we get an extremely high number of color combinations that we could choose from. I'm going to click cancel here, go back, and we're just going to pick, let's go with this blue accent 1 lighter 40%. When we click that, you can see it applies that block to the entire amount of text. Another thing that we can do is we're going to come down here and we'll select another paragraph. This will give us another option for how we could add some style to that page. If we click this drop down here, this is our borders option. So we shaded it by adding color. You can really kind of see the box of where it's going to be. And then the next thing that we could look at is the border options. We have choices of giving it any part of the border, top, bottom, no border, right border, left border, just the outside border, inside borders, which you don't really have. This would be more for if you were going to be creating some type of a table or working in a chart. But the outside borders are what are going to give us kind of that box around this, around the paragraph. So I'm going to go ahead and click outside border, and then when I click off of it, you can see that our border, we have just a box around that, so we've really kind of selected that paragraph. We could still type. I could add sample text. You can see I'm just adding some sample text in. And so we can always add as I press enter. Because my mouse pointer was, or my insertion point was inside of that box, it's now making this box larger. I'm going to get rid of those. If I had clicked outside of the insertion point, now when I press enter, the box is not getting bigger because my insertion point was outside of the border. I want us to go back, and now we're going to select this the last paragraph. There's a couple in between that I didn't pick, and click my drop down. Now I'm going to look at borders and shading. So I want you to click that option. And so what this is going to give us is some shading options that we can give a certain look to the border. So there's preset options, and so let's look at just the 3D look. It gives us somewhat of a preview. I really feel like with these it's a little bit harder to tell than some of the other previews. You can see we can choose to apply it to a certain part of text or to the paragraph as a whole. We're going to keep it as the paragraph. Click OK, and you can see that that does pretty much the same thing. However, if we look at some of the other options, we'll see a little bit of a difference. I'm actually going to select all of our text, Control A, which selects all of our text. Go back to our borders again. This time go to Borders and Shading, and now I'm going to do the shadow. When we click OK, it may be a little bit hard to see, but the bottom and the right-hand side are a little bit thicker of a line. It's a little bit heavier line that's going to be added to it. And so we can see where it has now added that to the look. We can also look at our options under our borders. Go back to border and shading, and then now I want us to look at some other things that we can change, that we can actually change it to exactly what we want. There are actually some different border options that we can use, some patterns, but one of the big things that I'm going to do is make the line thicker, which is changing the width that it would have. I'm also going to change the color. You'll notice it's the same color palette that we have with the same system of naming the patterns as there were before. I'm going to click a orange color there, change it just to a much wider or a much thicker line, just so we can really see that contrast. And we also added the pattern to that. So I'm going to click OK. And so now you can see that that paragraph or that section of paragraphs that I had selected are in that other border that we can add. And the last section that we're going to look at in this video that has to do with our paragraph formatting, there is still more to get to, but the last thing we're going to look at for the sake of this video is we're going to talk about spacing. So I'm going to select all of them. I'm leaving our paragraph changes up there just so that you can have those as a reminder. But we're going to select all of our text, and then this time we're going to choose the spacing. That's this option here with the arrows pointing up and down in between the alignment and the shading options. If we click that, this gives us some preset options for how to change how many spaces are in between each line. So we can go all the way up to having it triple spaced, which really fills up the page. However, it doesn't allow you really to fit a whole lot on the page, and so especially depending on what you're using it for, it may not be the best for writing a paper. But if you are trying to give a set of instructions or some other directions that you're looking more for a style rather than a lot of content on a page, it could be useful. We can change all the way down to single spacing, which is basically it's just going down to the next line. We can change it from 1.15, 1.5 to 2.5. If we click the line spacing options, you'll see that we can actually change exactly how much we want to be in between. It's completely customizable to where you can change how many points there are, how much space is between each line that's actually going to be there. We can set it to being exactly a certain amount. We can change a lot of options here, but they can really just allow us to change how much space is between each section. We're going to change this. Let's just change it to 6 point. Click OK. Excuse me, that's the spacing that was becoming afterwards. We're still at triple spaced. And then we're going to go back down to a single space. The spacing option was how much comes after a line, the amount of space that comes in there. Click OK. I also wanted you to see some shortcuts that we have. If I press on my keyboard, I know you can't see it on the video, but the Control button and 2, that's actually our shortcut for double spacing it. Control and 1, and it goes back to single spaced. However, Control 3 doesn't make it triple spaced. The only shortcut is just going to be for single space and double spaced. So there you go, just some tips for how to add some spacing and some of the paragraph formatting, which again, the point is really just to control the entire and the overall flow of how a document looks. Practice some of these, use these in your papers, and I think that they will be helpful to add that style while still keeping a professional look to your paper. Thank you.